And we always give it a little bit of a count to make sure that we're live. We're doing it live. We'll do it live. I watched that the other day. I was like, oh, what a classic meltdown on camera. I've had a few of those, minus the F bombs. Anyway, all right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. The 5 biggest draft busts in this draft class. Matt Waldman, Cecil, Lammey here on the Audible Live, and why Mailik Willis is a player, Matt, that I've said is the biggest boom bust factor in this draft class. From the quarterback position, we know about his athleticism, we know about his rocket arm, we know the upside is there, but there's upside in Tyler Huntley as well. So when you look at Willis and everything that he has to learn to be a great pro quarterback, would you put him as one of those 5 potential busts in this draft class?
I think you could, because I think the boom bust factor is significant when you consider quarterbacks who are going to go in the first round anyway, because the hit rate somewhere between 45 and 50% over the past 15, 20 years. And that hit rate is really, can they earn a second contract as a starter with the same team they began with and make a Pro Bowl or have production that's up there with Pro Bowl production? And I think that, Mailik Willis certainly has a chance to develop with the right team and system. And a lot of people like to say, well, he could be like Josh Allen. There's only one, to me, when you start talking about he could be the next, just shut your mouth, at that point, because it's not happening that way. The next Jordan Love was the next Patrick Mahomes, Drew Lock was the next, Baker Mayfield was the next 3 different people. And all 3 of them are fighting in his head right now. So, I mean, it's one of those situations where Mailik Willis would need to have a coach like Brian Dable, who would fit the system to him very well. He would need to have a system that fits to his strengths and minimize his weaknesses, and a system that would allow him to basically do what he does right now in his first year in the NFL without putting too much pressure on him, which is running around and if he doesn't find his first read and not getting a ton of issues with that during his first year in the league. And then maybe he could develop from there if they match the scheme and continue to mold the scheme to the talent. And then he can work like Josh Allen did and develop the way Josh Allen did, which is harder to do than people realize. And Allen showed glimpses of foundational techniques and concepts that I don't think Mailik Willis has shown in his game thus far. So the boom bust factor is high with him. I totally agree with that.
Well, and he's probably the only one at the quarterback position. Again, this isn't a great quarterback class coming into the league. And I can't say that Kenny Pickett, he might be the most boring, he's right here, and that's where we all expect him. So I think with bust, we maybe should have, described what we consider, in that aspect, Matt. But I just think it's the players that we either expect too much from or have that physical ability like Willis, which is off the charts. I mean, his arm is incredibly rare. But as Greg Cosell has always said and told me years ago, physical stuff is easy to see.
Yeah.
I'm watching film. Yeah, but that's watching what you need to watch for.
Yeah, I'll give you one right now who is a quarterback that I think is going to be a bust. And I'm not rooting for him to be. You want these guys to succeed.
Right.
But Desmond Ridder, to me, I wouldn't touch him. And I know he's going to be the first quarterback likely taken off the board.
He's a darling out there, man. He's a darling because he's so damn toolsy, and he led Cincinnati. My counter argument to that is who was I talking to the other day? And they're like, well, man, when you take Cincinnati and make them, I said, yeah, but look at everyone around him. Yeah. Look at the offensive weapons. Look at the defensive weapons. It's not like Cincinnati had a bunch of slappies and Desmond Ridder. They had some really good, highly drafted and highly coveted players on both sides of the ball. Hell, I talked about Majai Sanders any chance I get.
Yeah, and here's the thing with Ridder that this is where I think quarterback evaluation is right now and where it needs to be. And the best teams are kind of, here, and the other teams are further back. And I think what happens is They look at the tools, like you said, the physical tools, and they look at the intellectual capability of memorizing information and recalling that information from an academic standpoint. But, you know, the way they tried to do that was with the Wonderlic test. They finally gotten rid of that. But, you know, some of the best quarterbacks ever, Dan Marino, and I'm going to say maybe not ever, but some of the better starting quarterbacks, even in the past 20, 30 years, Dan Marino, Brett Favre, Steve
Jim
McNair,
Kelly. I think
you
Jim
know,
Kelly had a low
Jim
Wonderlic
Kelly.
test, right?
Yeah, these are guys. What the difference was is they were plenty smart enough, but the intelligence that they need to measure and they're starting to do is actually processing speed, which is more of an intuitive thing. If you're a performer, whether it's someone who you're on the radio and a host, or you
Plays the
are a
saxophone.
comedian, you play the saxophone, whatever it is that you do, you're a stand-up comedian, you need to have good timing. And when you recognize an opportunity to deliver with good time, especially actors, it's got to look natural. It's got to be at the speed of intuition. And the best quarterbacks see the information and act on it immediately. And the information they see isn't when it's already open, it's when it's about to break open. They understand how to combine things in a way where they can combine the physical and the mental and the conceptual of things and the techniques that they use in that manner. Lamar Jackson is a great example of someone who does that. And Patrick Mahomes is a great example of someone who does those things, even though he has a great photographic memory from what people say. But the point being is that when you look at Ridder, the thing I've seen over and over again with him that people miss, besides the fact that his mechanics are baseball style and that can lead to inaccuracies, is that he does not know the difference between danger and no danger with leverage against defenders on enough route concepts that you almost wish that there could be a visor over his face that blinks red or green so that he could know when to let the ball go.
Be like Iron Man, right? He
instantaneously.
sees the stuff in front of him. And
Yeah.
I've said it in a much less intelligent way, Matt, than you just said it. But I've always said, show me pro decisions.
Yeah.
You know, he said he's toolsy as the day is long. And I fight this argument. There's some guys locally who like love him because they discovered him or whatever. It's like, that's fine. But show me his pro decisions. Like, you could show me the physical stuff. I already know it. I've seen it. But show me how many pro decisions did he make? Yeah. Not many.
No, not many at all. And what I think a pro decision is really it's first, it's those 3 to 5 plays a game where defenses say, we know how to stop you and we're going to make you be uncomfortable and work through your uncomfortable thing. Because what people think about is like, oh, he started off strong. Well, when he starts off statistically strong, it's against defenses that haven't scouted against him. And then when he overcomes that, what they've shown, if they overcome it in those first year and a half, what they're showing now is what they showed on college tape. They haven't shown whether they've developed even more in the NFL. Guys like Tom Brady, Matt Stafford, players at the top usually who are now going to be consistently at the top of your rankings. Those are usually players who have developed more since college, not just acclimated to their style of play against faster defenses that are more complex. So the first stage is just to see, are you going to get the guy that you saw in college in the first year and a half? Then the next stage is, can they grow from that when defenses say, now we can do enough to stop that guy who's acclimated from his college days. And so, this is not a quarterback class unless you're in a 2 quarterback league. To me, if you're in a super flex league, draft a guy who falls to the late second round and take your chance with him if you really need a guy to potentially be a QB1, and then wait till rounds 3 and later to get a couple of guys who could be outliers that you take a chance on as maybe a quarterback too, and just load up on whatever your positional strength is, whether it's running back or wide receiver. Create the surplus you need, and then you can trade for who you want later on. So I would just say this is a draft where you draft your strength on your roster already so that it's not a huge loss for you. And if you win on that pick, you get the surplus to pick the position of need that you want through a trade.
Well, 5 potential draft busts is what we're talking about here on the Audible Live. It's Cecil, Lammey, it's Matt Waldman, Sigmund Bloom on assignment, and so is Dr. Gene Bramall. Just we'll get him back. We'll get him back for sure.
We're gonna make a road trip up there, and we'll do a live audible out of his office or something.
To his castle.
Yeah, climb the turret.
Climb the turret. Yeah. So we'll make it happen. Is there a bust in the running backs? Because again, there's no first rounders. And for me, Matt, forgive me, I'm gonna get off my lawn moment. I don't pay attention to draft Twitter. These last 2 weeks are great, and specifically, it starts with the RSP, the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. If you don't have your copy, make sure to go get your copy now, mattwaldmanrsp.com. But for me, when my draft studying is done, these last 2 weeks are great because I get to read the RSP. I get to check to see what Dane Brugler thinks of this draft class. That's when I check in on other stuff. I still don't participate in draft Twitter because, well, for reasons that I'll keep talking about ad nauseum. But is there a running back where the crowd seems to be really high on? Because again, there's no first rounders. Yeah. So I guess I struggle to be like, Kenneth Walker is going to be a bust. Like, well, one, he's my favorite back in this class. But I'm like, okay, I don't really see or hear people going on and on about Brian Robinson. I actually do like Dameon Pierce. And again, we're talking about like 4th round guys. You know what I mean? Yeah. So is there a player, maybe a Rashad White, but again, is that a bust if he's a 5th rounder? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's some guys I don't think have the skills to translate to the pros. I don't know in this running back class without any first rounders or top tier backs if there's a bust. What do you think?
I would agree with that. I think White comes the closest, and it's mainly more of a bust from the standpoint of fantasy players who seem to be really high on him in the way that they were high on Kalen Ballage, and they think that maybe he'll be drafted earlier than he actually will. I think the NFL has a smarter beat on him than maybe fantasy does. But White is if we were to talk about White, I think he's good enough right now that if you needed him to contribute in a tight window of scenarios on your team every week, he can give you some quality work somewhere between 5 to 7 touches a week at best. But asking him to become the man right away or putting him in a role where he splits the workload more down the middle, I think that's when you'd start to see the seams showing in his game, just because where people get excited about him is the pass catching.
Right. I was going to say he's a nice slot receiver.
Yes, he's very good at tracking the ball. Very good at that. But he's not as physical as you would expect for his size. And one of the problems that he has too is this is a basic thing you should look for with running backs. If a running back has a one-on-one in the hole with a safety or a linebacker, every running back who is entering a crease and sees that, and the linebacker or safety isn't heading downhill in the hole at them, they're on their heels or they're at a standstill, at that point that you enter the hole, that every running back should be licking their chops that they're getting yards on that play, because they're either going to make you miss in a tight position once they close, or they're going to run you over. And he could do both. And what he does too often is he gets halfway into the hole, notices that, and then tries to bounce outside of the hole. Like, oops, somebody's there. And it's like, and he also runs to open space rather than running to leverage. When you run to leverage, it's like quarterback anticipation. You are able to work and manipulate your blockers and the defenders who are being blocked or out away from the blockers into a position where you then can break towards open space. If you're running towards open space in college rather than and ignoring the leverage, then by the time you get to that open space, guess what? It's closed. It's even closed faster in the NFL. And Rashad White runs to open space, and that's another problem. Can he develop? I think that's very possible, but I think he's more Darren McFadden than he is, and I'm saying McFadden not running in a gap scheme. So he's more of like the worst of Darren McFadden than he is the best of Darren McFadden.
McFadden left to make his own decisions.
Yeah.
Like, tell him where to go, and he'll go there swiftly, and then maybe get knocked down quickly. We did have a question from the chat room from Jacobo. Jacob, sorry. He says, "What's up, football guys, homies? Is Wildman concerned about Brees Hall's contact balance?"
Not really. I mean, I think when I look at where I have Hall, um, with him, I judge contact balance in two different ways. And so one is the direct collisions where you're heading straight downhill and the collision's coming straight downhill at you. And then what I call indirect collisions where they're coming from an angle. And Hall has starter level indirect contact balance. And that's usually the most common type of hits that you're going to take as a running back. If you're an elusive running back with good vision, more often than not, you're going to be avoiding direct hits, and that's a good thing. So he didn't have I didn't have as much exposure to him with direct contact. But if to me, any player who can win against a linebacker, um, one-on-one in a direct collision meets the basic threshold from what I've studied. Like I mentioned probably about 4 or 5 years ago that or it was with Treylon Williams, because I said I thought Treylon Williams would be kind of a draft day bust for people who were high on him pre-draft, because when I've studied backs at that point, I think 15 or 16 years, all the data I had with contact balance showed that only, I think, 2 running backs out of over 700 that I've studied actually became consistent starters when they failed to be able to win against a linebacker one-on-one in a direct collision from what I studied in the college game. And the one that I remember who stuck out was Marlon Mack. That was like one of the only ones. Brees Hall is able to meet that threshold, so I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay, it is the Audible Live. Cecil, Lammey, Matt Waldman here going over 5 potential draft busts in this draft class. And we get to the wide receiver group, and oh boy, there seems to be a consensus, and consensuses can be dangerous, Matt. But with Garrett Wilson, Jamison Williams, even Drake London has his fan group I've seen, and Chris Olave. With Treylon Burks, there seems to be disagreement. So where everyone's talking about Deebo Samuel, mainly because he's going to get traded to the Chiefs. Well, he hasn't been traded yet, right? I always wake up and do this show, and I love Sigmund to death. Like, I love him. You love him as well, Matt. But Sigmund will be like, "Did you hear?" I'm like, "Dude, I just woke up." Like, I don't know how many times I've told you, but please, like, don't ask me the question. Just tell me what happened. So
we need to get like Bloom and curlers with the old 70s hair dryer in a salon chair. Like that would be, he would be like
Coffee
in Pittsburgh.
talk. Yeah.
And Bloom could be like one of those and New Orleans would be perfect for him. He needs to find himself a place like that. And that could be where he sets up shop and like has a whole cast of characters parade through.
Yes. It's like the shop in Better Call Saul.
Yeah.
Or he could be set up next to Stormy Daniels, who actually is a palm reader in New Orleans, like not too far from his house.
There you go.
Anyway, Stormy Daniels. There's always a checklist for the Audible, like Stormy Daniels reference. Check. Let's talk about not Sigmund and rollers, but everyone says Deebo Samuel. I hesitate to go there just because Deebo's so interesting in everything he can do. But Treylon Burks, bus factor or no, Matt?
Absolute bus factor. And yeah, he's not Deebo Samuel. Let's not even.
And is he the one, again, talking about the consensus? And again, Matt, grumpy old man, I don't pay attention to draft Twitter, but like there seems to be a consensus on everyone else, especially Drake London. Like, oh my God. I'm like, but Treylon Burks seems to be the guy with the bus factor.
I think he does have a bus factor. And the reason being is that he's a toolsy guy, but he's that player that when you look at against press coverage, you want to see some skills against press coverage. And the thing is that, yeah, Deebo doesn't want to be Deebo anymore. That's a terrific way of mentioning that. But you have to understand he's not as fast as Deebo. He's not as quick as Deebo. I don't think he's as good of a route runner as that. How much does the hog hunting factor into the RSP?
Or hug hunting? Hug hunting's good
the
too.
hug hunting too. I think that got some players in trouble probably. So, but I would say that with Treylon Burks, he's more Kenny Galladay, circa Detroit, and really probably New York too, than he is Deebo Samuel. If you
He's not
take
Cordell Patterson, and that's the thing is someone's going to get in trouble by this Debo thing,
yeah,
and they're going to be like, "Here you go, Treylon," and that's not doing because again, the dirty secret in the NFL is it's about fit, Matt. So if Treylon
yeah,
Burks goes to the right fit, and someone goes, "Nah, you're not Debo," and they put him in that Galladay, which I like as an example, I really like that. I'll steal it from you, Matt. I'll give you a quarter every time I say it. But if a team does that with him, that's
yeah,
smart football. That means his bust factor will be lower.
yeah.
But if someone says you're Debo, go do Debo things, and then he can't do it, then everyone's going to be like, why can't he be Debo? Well, that's
Yeah.
not who he is.
Yeah, and that's the problem is because what he is a big slot receiver right now who needs two good receivers on the outside so that he can match up against nickel corners, safeties, and linebackers where he doesn't have to win against press. The fact that a defender can play off him, position himself in the break lane of where he knows it's going to go, and Burks can't figure out a way to finesse his way around. He has to try and be the hammer and run through the guy and get hung up. And you can't do that on plays where he's likely going to be a fit for a lot of teams, which is spread offenses with RPOs where he's going to run that slant over the middle and the defender's like, we know what route you're running. This is, basically there's two chances here and he can't get away from it. Even with a runway to figure out a way to put a move on a defender he can't do, you're costing your quarterback an opportunity. I mean, the quarterbacks have to come off that, and if it's a timing schemed up play like that, then there's not much left for them to access. They've got to break the pocket and run for their lives. And so when I look at Burks, is he what team is he going to land on if he's going to get picked early that has two good receivers already who are going to take that pressure off of him? He may develop down the line. I think the skills, the physical skills and some of the technical skills are there where with this, he has some footwork, he has some hand usage at the line to be able to work with releases, but he doesn't combine them together. He gets flummoxed by he gets flummoxed by all cornerbacks who try to jam him right now. It's not just patient ones like with Garrett Wilson, or
Right.
Devonta Smith last year. So yeah, he's the guy that the grade's high enough that if you can pick him, if he falls a little bit to you because of where his landing spot is, and it doesn't look like Debo, but there's like good players around him, you might want to consider him then. But if you're trying to pick him early because you think you're getting the next Debo, I think you're going to get the next high pick in your dynasty league in 2023.
What would you think about the Jets getting him early second, not first, but early second because they want Debo. Hell, they wanted Tyreek, they wanted Russell Wilson. But
it would be a Jets pick. That would be
it would be a Jets pick, and I love the Denzel Mims talk. Like it's totally working on it. Like Mims doesn't fit what they do, but they might want to see what Burks could do. But you mentioned having other receivers around him. I'm like, well, I don't have anybody.
Yeah,
So that would be a trouble spot.
Yeah, especially with the quarterback they have right now, who maybe he'll improve and show something that he didn't show a lot of last year. I mean, but the fact, when you look at Elijah Moore and how well he performed with Flacco under center, compared to what he did with Wilson. Wilson has a ways to go before we even see any of these receivers move up. Because even a guy like Keelan Cole, who may not be a fantasy name, but it's a guy I always like to recommend at the end of drafts because he is a skilled, intelligent receiver who can play multiple roles. And when you put him with a good quarterback, he can deliver for you and deliver good plays. He's the type of guy that will probably have a 10, 12-year career in this league as a backup. But when called on, put in a good situation, he can produce for you. And I think that the fact that he couldn't do that with Zach Wilson tells you about where Zach Wilson has to go.
It is the Audible Live here. Cecil, Lammey, Matt Waldman. We've done 4, now to 5. And a player that I'm rooting for. Again, no one ever roots for a guy to be a bust, right? Unless you're an Aloha, and I got to clean it up for YouTube purposes. And sorry, Joe. But just move the letters around and add a couple, and you'll see an Aloha. We're not rooting for guys to be a bust. And certainly this is a player that I am rooting for to be a star. because he was a Cowboy back at Oklahoma State before he went to Virginia. And that's Jelani Woods. I guess because I don't see people like overhyping McBride. If anything, I was texting with our friend Chad Ryder from NFL Network because he was giving me an ulcer because he had the top 2 picks for every team, and he had the Broncos being able to get Trey McBride at 64. And so everyone on my station, because I've been saying since McBride's pro day and even before then at the Senior Bowl, I was like, there's no way he's going to be there at 64. They're at the end of the second round. You're never going to get Trey McBride. So don't think about it. Like, you don't stop. And so when Chad did this, and then Mel Kiper had his mock that had the Broncos getting Trey McBride at 64, woo, the Denver airwaves were going off and my ears were ringing and my stomach was hurting because I was like, there's no way McBride's going to be there at 64. Stop. Please stop. So I texted Chad. I said, you're giving me an ulcer. He said, about what? I tend to do that a lot. And I said, McBride's not going to be there, man. He's not going to be there at 64. So we go to the next tight end. And the tight end that maybe has the bust factor because Dulcich,
Yeah.
Dulcich, I don't necessarily think has bust factor. Because I guess maybe he's not quite the receiver or he doesn't develop as a blocker as people would think, right? If you think of his flaws at UCLA. But let's talk about Jelani Woods, who a lot of people are excited about because I guess size and, playmaking ability. Everyone's looking for playmaking tight ends. I'm not sure this is the draft class to look for that.
No, if you're going to look later because there are better receivers. There are better runners after the catch. There are better route runners than Jelani Woods who are going to be taken later. The thing about Jelani is that you look at the production at the workouts and you see the numbers that he put up and everyone got excited. He was a backup
6'7" with the 37.5 vertical jump, a 10.9 broad jump, short shuttle at 4.33, and a 3-cone at 6.95. You're under 7 at 6'7".
Yeah.
Those are impressive numbers.
Yeah. That very impressive numbers. He was a backup throughout his career at Oklahoma State, kind of like a guy, and also ran on that team, transferred to Virginia. And I may have seen 2 plays out of all the tape I watched of him at both schools where he even flashed anything that remotely looked like the athletic ability that he showed. Now, that said, George Kittle wasn't talked about a lot either. And but you could see the athletic ability with him. That was pretty apparent through his tape. It was just the number of targets that he got, the opportunities he got weren't as strong. But with Woods, when I watch him, what I see is a second tight end on an NFL team, a guy who can block reasonably well for a reserve if you have him double teaming and not having a priority assignment. He can catch the ball with his hands reasonably well, but the way he moves as a route runner looks lumbering. The way he bends is lumbering. There's not any talk of him having injuries that he played through that were significant. He's just not he plays slower than his times. So what that tells you is that his processing of the game is slower than his athletic ability. And it's the old maxim that coaches talk about all the time. They're like, I would rather have a tight end who runs a 4.8 or 4.9 40 and has worse numbers but plays fast because they see the field fast, they read the coverage correctly, they have the techniques down to be able to make the plays and combine them together, than a guy who actually is a fast athlete, an explosive athlete who thinks slow. And I'm not saying he's dumb. There are some incredibly smart players. Alex Smith was a very intelligent player who played slow for the most part, especially in high leverage situations where you really needed a play to be made. And he had a long career in the NFL, but he was always a disappointment relative to his draft status in terms of what people really were expecting. I mean, so to me, Woods has a high bust factor. If you're expecting him to be the second or third tight end off the board and produce that way, I think you're getting a guy who's really a high end tight end too in the NFL, and probably a low end tight end too in your fantasy leagues.
Top 5 biggest potential draft busts in the NFL draft coming up a week from today. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? A week from today.
Everything just keeps going so fast these days, man. It's crazy. We need the calendar to slow down a little bit.
I know 2 weeks from now, my son will be graduating from Washington State. So I'm like, wait a second.
Congrats.
I was just
Congrats
taking him
to
to
Liam.
Pop Warner practice.
Right.
And then I turn around and he's a grown man. So, yes, very proud of all of our children and very proud of you here in the viewing and listening audience. It is the Audible Live, Cecil, Lammey, Matt Waldman. Matt, how does it feel a week before the draft? Like 2 weeks before the drafts, I get to exhale. This is probably my favorite time because I can be a little bit ornery. Because again, I don't participate in the normal draft Twitter stuff. So if I see a discussion, I could jump in and be like that, whatever. And plus all the work's mainly done, unless who was this? Was it Saginaw Valley? Broncos worked out a lacrosse guy. And I was like, bless America. Sorry, Joe. Like, I haven't looked at that guy. So I'm watching Saginaw Valley State. I think the Nuggets were getting bounced in the playoffs or something. And I'm watching Saginaw Valley State because who wants to watch the Nuggets? But how does the draft, how does it feel for you post April 1 and then 1 week from the draft?
For me, this is doing a lot of pods, which is great. And that's a lot of fun. And then I get to relax a little bit. So it's a nice time. I find that about a week or two, about 10 days before the draft, Twitter, I look on there and it looks like the scene in Jaws where they have the shark hunt, after they kill the kid and all these New Yorkers start coming in and they're in their little motorboats and they've got dynamite and they're going, look at that thing. What is that? Somebody, and Richard Drivers goes, it's a tiger shark. He's like, oh, what? This is kind of that time for me when I see people on Twitter giving fired off draft takes, and it's not the same, 20 people doing it. Now it's folks who've come over from like draft, from NFL media who are now dipping their toe in the water because assignments dictate that. Or
Right.
They're interested in it, and it can be fun. And there's some informative stuff. And then there's stuff where like, you point something out and they're like, oh, what,
Right.
And so I think on Twitter, I posted a GIF of a forest with fog just completely enveloping it. and that was my take with that. So, I mean, it's a fun time. Next week is post-draft time to get ready for all of that and start putting that together. And I've been watching a few players here and there, but I try to take it easy because I'm usually pretty burnt out after April 1st. So
yeah,
it's a good time to kind of recharge.
Yeah, it's good. A little me time, right?
Yeah.
A little me time. And programming note, next Thursday, we will have the first round in its entirety. Sigmund Bloom making the return with a cavalcade of guests. And Matt, you'll be right there with Sig for the first round. So no live show at noon Eastern time next week because, well, you guys are going to be doing the entire draft. I'll be on the air 30 hours over 3 days.
Oh, boy.
Which is
good luck to you.
Yeah, lots of throat coat tea. But either way, if I can pop in, I try every year. I think it was the Dallas year.
Yeah.
I was like, I tried, but then Sigmund didn't notice that I was down on the bottom. I was like wavy, and I was like, I'm here just for a little bit. If I can make it, I will, because I love celebrating this time of year with you all. Love celebrating everyone out there as well. Get that RSP, rookie scouting portfolio, Matt, because it's not just about the pre-draft stuff with the RSP.
No, because with the post-draft is really, I look at it two ways. The post-draft is a very fantasy-friendly tool in the sense that that's when I get to take draft capital and be able to incorporate that into where I rank the players. And you get tiered rankings where you get an analysis between my ranking of the player post-draft, the ADP that I'm seeing in a lot of good leagues, and giving you a sweet spot of where you can draft these players. So if I still stick to my guns and say Nick Chubb is better than Saquon Barkley, I'm not going to tell you to draft him first overall. I'm going to show you that you can get him maybe at pick 25, 30 and get him there. So I do that. And what people often say to me, and I just want to share this real quick, is that I often get new buyers and they look at the pre-draft, especially if they're the answers only kind of folks. And that's great. If that's what you are, you know, you don't have time for reading all that, that you may look at it and go, this is a lot of information. It's great, but it's a lot. Then I look at the poster and they're like, I love this. And they invariably write me and go, why don't you sell that separately? I would just, you know, I'd pay the same amount just for this alone. I said, trust me, you're going to want the pre-draft down the line, because the post-draft shows you the redraft thinker's way of playing Dynasty, which is just, you're thinking only about the rookie draft and instant impact players and who's going to have the most likely chance of immediate impact in the first 2 to 3 years. But the pre-draft is going to show you the players unvarnished from all the BS that's draft capital that goes into salaries are getting paid, past injuries that really don't mean anything, off-field stuff that turn out not to mean anything, all that kind of stuff that's incorporated in the draft capital by the NFL and opportunity. So maybe 3 or 4 years from now, when a player shows up and starts getting an opportunity and looking good, whether it's before the season or during the season because due to injuries, you can go back to the pre-draft and you get an unvarnished look at it, and you wind up being able to pick that player off your waiver wire who saves your season, even if it's for 4 to 6 weeks where you really needed him and then you have to put him aside. But now, instead of losing 6 games, you've won, 4 to 5 of them, and you're in the playoffs because of that pick. And invariably, when I tell people that 2 or 3 years later, they write me and go, you were right. I look at the pre-draft far more now because I realize it has evergreen value. So you get both of that in a newsletter in one. And it's a great way of being able to be able to say, I can look at talent purely without all the BS that comes into the NFL business. And then I can incorporate that BS when we have to afterwards, so that you get a chance to look at the fit.
I think, and this is a larger topic, maybe we should save it for its own show, but like, you need to have dynasty brain. If you're playing dynasty, you need to have dynasty brain. And there's redraft brain, which we were all conditioned to play because that's what we started playing. Everyone, you don't start with like an auction salary cap dynasty super flex league, right? You start redraft, work, ESPN league, whatever. Like, have dynasty brain. Have dynasty brain. We have football brain. We are footballguys.com. Make sure to follow us and do all those YouTube things. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. He's Matt Waldman. I'm Cecil Lammey. Many thanks.
He's awesome.
To you all. Appreciate you all. Everyone, stay tuned. And as always, stay frosty.